hospital was a ghost town after midnight, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until every creak feels like a scream. I'd been a nurse here for 3 months, still the newbie on the night shift, and I swore I'd never let this place get under my skin. But that night, as I walked down the dim corridor toward the supply room, I felt it, a pair of eyes tracking me through the shadows. I told myself it was exhaustion, just my mind playing tricks after a 12-hour shift, until I turned the corner and saw him, Dr. Noah Bennett. The name alone carried weight around here. Chief resident, mid-30s, with a reputation for being brilliant and untouchable. He stood there in his white coat, leaning against the supply room door like he'd been waiting for me. His dark hair was mussed, like he'd run his hands through it one too many times, and his eyes, sharp, green, unnervingly steady, locked onto mine. "Olivia," he said, my name rolling off his tongue like he'd practiced it. "You're late." I froze, my sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. Late? I wasn't even supposed to be meeting anyone. I'd only come down here to grab more gauze for a patient in room 12, a kid with a broken arm who'd cried himself to sleep an hour ago. "I didn't know I was on a schedule, doctor," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the way my pulse kicked up. I wasn't one of those nurses who melted under his gaze. Plenty did, whispering about him in the break room like he was some forbidden prize. I'd always prided myself on staying professional, keeping my head down. But the way he looked at me then, like he saw straight through my scrubs to the nerves underneath, made me wonder if I'd misjudged the game. He pushed off the door, closing the distance between us in 2 easy steps, too close. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, and something warmer, like cedar. His cologne, maybe. "You've been avoiding me," he said, low enough that it felt like a secret meant just for us. Avoiding him? I almost laughed. I'd barely spoken to the man beyond handing him charts or nodding in the hallway. But there was that one time last week, our hands brushing over a clipboard, his fingers lingering a beat too long. I'd brushed it off as nothing. Hadn't I? "I've been working," I said, crossing my arms. "Some of us don't get to stand around looking mysterious all night." A flicker of a smile crossed his lips, quick and dangerous, like he enjoyed the pushback. He tilted his head, studying me, and I caught the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. Up close, he looked less like the polished doctor everyone idolized, and more like a man who hadn't slept in days. Vulnerable, almost. It threw me off. "Then why are you here now?" he asked, his voice dropping even lower. "Middle of the night, no one else around, just you and me." My stomach flipped. He wasn't wrong. The ward was dead quiet, the other nurses either on break or dozing at their stations. I'd volunteered for the supply run because I needed a minute to breathe, to shake off the weight of the shift. But now, standing here, with him, breathing felt like the last thing I could manage. I opened my mouth to answer. Something sharp, something to put him back in his place. But a noise stopped me cold. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing from the far end of the hall. My eyes darted past him, but the corridor stretched into darkness, the overhead lights flickering like they were about to give up. Someone was coming. Someone who'd see us, here alone, inches apart with no good reason to explain it. "Olivia," he said again, softer this time, his hand brushing my elbow as he stepped closer still. "We need to talk. Now!" My heart slammed against my ribs. Talk? About what? The clipboard moment? The way he was looking at me like I was a puzzle he needed to solve? Before I could decide whether to bolt or demand answers, the footsteps grew louder, and I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving toward us. A familiar silhouette I couldn't quite place. I didn't realize someone else had been watching us from the dark. Not until it was too late to run. If you want to know what happened next, stick around. Maybe hit that subscribe button for me. I've got more secrets to spill." The shadow froze me in place, my breath catching as the footsteps clicked closer down the hospital corridor. Dr. Noah Bennett didn't flinch. His hand lingered on my elbow, warm through my scrubs, and for a split second, I thought he'd pull me into the supply room to hide. Instead, he turned his head toward the sound, calm as ever, like we weren't teetering on the edge of something we couldn't explain. "Stay quiet," he murmured, his voice a thread of steel under the softness. I nodded, barely, my pulse hammering so loud I was sure whoever was coming could hear it. The figure stepped into the flickering light, and I exhaled. Too soon. It was Lauren, one of the senior nurses. Mid-40s, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who'd seen everything and didn't miss a thing. Her ponytail swung as she stopped a few feet away, arms crossed over her clipboard. "Olivia, Dr. Bennett," she said, her tone flat, but her gaze slicing between us. "Supply run taking longer than usual?" The question hung there, heavy with suspicion. I felt my face heat up, the lie forming too slowly on my tongue. "Paperwork mix-up," Noah cut in, smooth as silk. He stepped back from me, casual, like we hadn't just been caught in a moment that felt too intimate for a hospital hallway. Olivia was helping me sort it out. Lauren's eyes narrowed, flicking to his hand, the one that had been on me a second ago, then back to my face. I forced a nod, clutching the gauze I'd come for like it was proof of my innocence. "Right," she said, unconvinced. "Well, room 12's waiting. Don't let me keep you." She turned to go, but not before throwing one last look over her shoulder, a warning I couldn't unsee. I waited until her footsteps faded before rounding on him. "What was that?" I hissed, keeping my voice low. "Paperwork?" She didn't buy it for a second. Noah leaned against the wall, arms crossed, that faint smile tugging at his lips again. "She doesn't need to," he said. "She just needs to walk away." And she did. His confidence rattled me. How could he be so sure? I wanted to snap back, to tell him this wasn't a game I'd signed up for. But the truth was, I hadn't pulled away when he touched me. And that scared me more than Lauren's stare. "Look," he said, straightening up, his tone shifting to something quieter, almost urgent. "I meant it. We need to talk, not here." He glanced down the hall, then back at me, his green eyes catching the dim light. "Meet me in the break room, 10 minutes. It wasn't a question. Before I could argue, he brushed past me, his shoulder grazing mine, leaving that cedar scent lingering in his wake. I stood there, gauze in hand, my mind spinning. 10 minutes. I could ignore him, go back to room 12, pretend this never happened, or I could walk straight into whatever this was, dangerous, forbidden, and pulling me in like a tide I couldn't fight. I delivered the gauze, checked the kids' chart, and told myself I was done. But 9 minutes later, I was pushing open the break room door. It was empty except for him. Noah sat at the table, a styrofoam cup of coffee steaming in front of him, his coat draped over the chair. He looked up as I stepped in, and the air shifted, thicker, charged. "You came," he said, like he hadn't been sure I would. I didn't sit. I stood by the counter, arms crossed, keeping the distance between us. "What's this about?" I asked, sharper than I meant to. "And don't say paperwork." He leaned back, studying me. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note, sliding it across the table. "Found this in my locker last week," he said, after we brushed hands. My stomach dropped. I unfolded it, my fingers trembling just enough to notice. Scrawled in black ink, "I know what you're hiding. Keep her out of it." No signature. No clue who'd written it. I looked up at him, my throat tight. What does this mean? Hiding what? His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a crack in that cool exterior. I don't know yet, he admitted. But whoever wrote it, they've been watching us. And now you're in it too. The room felt smaller, the hum of the vending machine louder. I wanted to laugh it off, call it a prank, but the way he was looking at me, serious, almost protective, made it real. Why me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stood, closing the gap between us again, and this time I didn't step back. Because you're here, he said simply. Because you didn't walk away that day, and neither did I. His hand hovered near mine, not quite touching, but the heat of it was enough to make my skin prickle. Before I could answer, the door creaked behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, and saw the edge of a shadow slip back into the hall. Someone had been there, listening. Noah swore under his breath, his hand brushing my back as he moved toward the door. "We're not alone," he whispered, and I realized we'd just stepped deeper into a mess I couldn't escape. The hospital corridor stretched before me like a tunnel of flickering shadows, each fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead. My heart still raced from the close call in the break room, where Noah and I had discovered someone eavesdropping on us. The air smelled of antiseptic and tension, thick and unspoken, as I walked beside Dr. Noah Bennett, the chief resident whose presence both steadied and unsettled me. "We need to check the supply room," Noah said, his voice low, cutting through the hum of the hospital. "There might be more clues there." I nodded, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Olivia, RN, new to the night shift, still finding my footing, shouldn't be chasing mysteries with a man like Noah. But curiosity, and something deeper I couldn't name, pulled me forward. The supply room door clicked open under Noah's key, revealing a cramped space lined with shelves of medical supplies. Boxes of gloves, syringes, bandages casting strange shadows in the dim light. We searched in silence, our movements careful. My fingers brushed against a folder wedged behind a box of gauze, and my breath caught as I pulled it out. Patient file, Emily Thompson. "Noah," I whispered, handing it to him. His face paled as he flipped through the pages, stopping at a handwritten note in the margin. "Ask Dr. Bennett about the dosage." His hands trembled slightly, and he closed the file. "Olivia, I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "During Emily's treatment, I covered for someone. If anyone found out..." My stomach dropped. "You could lose your license," I finished, the weight of his words sinking in. He nodded, his green eyes meeting mine, filled with shame and fear. "I thought it was behind me, but someone knows. And now they're dragging you into it." "Why? Me?" I stepped back, my mind reeling. "I'm just a nurse. I have nothing to do with this." Noah reached out, his hand grazing my arm, sending a shiver through me. "Because you're here, Olivia. Because I trust you." His touch was electric, and I hated how much I wanted to believe him. But trust a man hiding a secret that could end his career, and mine? "I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice cracking. "If this comes out, I'm finished too." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But I need your help to find out who's behind this. Please." The sincerity in his eyes made my resolve waver. The scent of cedar from his cologne mingled with the sterile air, and our faces were inches apart. For a moment, the world narrowed to just us. His breath, my heartbeat, the unspoken pull between us. Then, a loud knock echoed through the room, shattering the moment. Noah pulled me behind a shelf, just as the door creaked open. Through the gaps in the supplies, I saw Lauren step inside, her eyes scanning the room. My heart pounded, and I held my breath, praying she wouldn't see us. Lauren's gaze lingered where we'd stood, but her phone rang, and she stepped out to answer it, leaving the door ajar. "Now," Noah whispered, and we slipped out, careful not to make a sound. As we hurried down the hall, I bumped a cart, sending a metal tray clattering to the floor. Lauren turned back, but we ducked around the corner just in time. Once safe, I leaned against the wall, breathless. "That was too close," I said. Noah nodded, his expression grim. "We need to talk to Lauren. She might know something." We found her in the break room, alone with a cup of tea, her ponytail loose, strands framing her tired face. She looked up as we entered, and fear flickered in her eyes. "Lauren," Noah said firmly, "we know about the notes." Her cup clattered against the saucer, and she stood, arms crossed. "What notes?" she asked, but her voice wavered. I pulled the latest message from my pocket. "This was left for me, and we found Emily Thompson's file. We know you made the mistake, not Noah." Lauren's face crumpled, and she sank back into her chair, hands covering her face. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, tears choking her words. "I gave Emily the wrong dose and panicked. Noah covered for me. But when I saw you two together, I thought he'd tell you, and I'd lose everything." "So you sent the notes to scare us?" I asked, my heart racing. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I was desperate. But there's more." She looked at Noah, her expression darkening. The night of Emily's procedure, Dr. Aiden Blake was there, observing. He saw it all, and told me to keep quiet. My pulse quickened. Aiden, another resident, always in Noah's shadow, always watching. "Why would he cover it up?" I asked. "I don't know," Lauren said. "But he's involved. You need to watch out for him." Noah's jaw tightened. "We'll deal with Aiden. But Lauren, you have to stop this." She nodded, standing. "I'm sorry. I'll figure out how to fix this." As she left, the intercom crackled. "Dr. Bennett, report to the administrator's office immediately." Noah's face drained of color. "This isn't good," he muttered, turning to me. "Wait for me, Olivia. We'll figure this out together." I nodded, but as he hurried away, doubt gnawed at me. What if the administrator knew? I couldn't just wait. I needed answers. I headed to the locker room to search Lauren's things. Inside her locker, behind spare scrubs, I found a vial of medication and a note. "Make sure Noah stays quiet, or the truth comes out." Aiden. It had to be. But what truth? Footsteps approached, and I shoved the note into my pocket as Lauren entered. "Olivia, what are you doing?" she demanded. "I found this," I said, holding up the vial. "From Aiden." Her face paled. "He's dangerous. Be careful." My phone buzzed. A text from Noah. "Meet me in the basement. Now, come alone." The basement? My heart raced, but I slipped past Lauren and took the elevator down. The doors opened to a dark, cold space, lit only by a flickering bulb. "Noah?" I called, my voice trembling. A figure stepped from the shadows. Not Noah, but Aiden, smirking. "Olivia," he said smoothly. "You've been digging where you shouldn't." "Where's Noah?" I demanded, my blood running cold. "Occupied," Aiden replied, holding up a phone. A video played, Noah and me kissing in the patient room. "I can ruin you both, unless Noah resigns." Noah emerged from the elevator, fury in his eyes. "Get away from her," he growled. Aiden chuckled. "I was just making Olivia an offer. Resign, Noah, or this video, and the truth about Emily goes public." "You're blackmailing me?" Noah's fists clenched. I grabbed his arm, holding him back. What do you want, Aiden? Simple, Aiden said, his tone icy. Noah leaves, and your careers survive. Check your email. The video's already with the administrator. Decide fast. Before Noah could respond, a crash echoed through the basement and the lights went out. Darkness swallowed us. I screamed, reaching for Noah, but grasped only air. Aiden's cold laugh rang out. Then silence fell, heavy and suffocating. What had we walked into, and how would we get out? The basement was a void of darkness, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and fear. My scream echoed off the walls as the lights died, leaving me blind and disoriented. Aiden's cold laugh cut through the black, sending a shiver down my spine. You think you can outsmart me? He taunted, his voice slithering from somewhere to my left. I've already won. The video's with the administrator. It's over for you both. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to breathe. Noah was somewhere in this darkness, and I needed to find him. Noah? I whispered, reaching out. But my hand met only empty air. Then, a warm grip closed around my wrist. I'm here, Noah murmured, his breath brushing my ear. We need Lauren. She's the key. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. How? Stall Aiden. I'll get help. Before I could protest, he slipped away, leaving me alone with the monster in the dark. Fear clawed at my throat, but I swallowed it down. Aiden, I called, my voice steadier than I felt. Maybe we can make a deal. A low chuckle. A deal? What could you possibly offer me, Olivia? I took a step forward, my eyes adjusting to the faint glow of an exit sign. I know about the medication error. Lauren told me everything. If you expose Noah, I'll make sure everyone knows your part in it. Silence. Then, Aiden's voice, closer now, dripping with disdain. You think anyone will believe you? I'm a doctor. You're just a nurse. The words stung, but I pressed on. Lauren will back me up. She's ready to confess. Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear him calculating. You're bluffing. Am I? I challenged, praying Noah had reached Lauren. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, blinding me. When my vision cleared, I saw Lauren standing at the basement entrance, her face pale but resolute. Behind her, 2 security guards and Mrs. Patel, the hospital administrator, looked on in confusion. Lauren? Aiden's voice wavered, his confidence cracking. Lauren stepped forward, her hands trembling. It's true, Aiden. I made a mistake with Emily's medication, and you told me to keep quiet. But I can't do this anymore. I'm telling the truth. Mrs. Patel's eyes widened. What's going on here? Noah appeared beside me, his expression grim but determined. Aiden has been blackmailing me, threatening to expose a video of Olivia and me if I didn't resign. But the real issue is the medication error that Lauren and Aiden covered up. Aiden's face twisted with rage. You can't prove anything, Lauren held up her phone, her voice steady now. I recorded our conversation, Aiden, when you told me to keep quiet. Mrs. Patel turned to Aiden, her tone icy. Is this true? Aiden stammered, but the evidence was undeniable. Mrs. Patel sighed heavily. Aiden, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Security, escort him out. As the guards led Aiden away, he shot me a venomous look. This isn't over, Olivia. But for now it was. Noah and I exchanged a glance, relief flooding through me like a tidal wave. Yet the weight of what had happened, and what could still happen, hung heavy between us. Later, in the break room, Mrs. Patel sat us down, her expression stern but not unkind. The video, she said. I've seen it. It's concerning. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Patel, She held up a hand. Given the circumstances and Aiden's actions, I'm willing to overlook it this time. But you both need to be careful. This hospital has strict policies for a reason. Noah nodded, his jaw tight. Understood. Thank you. As she left, Noah turned to me, his green eyes soft with something unspoken. Olivia, I'm sorry for dragging you into this. I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. We're in this together now, aren't we? He reached for my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles in a way that sent warmth spiraling through me. What happens next? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Noah's gaze held mine, steady and sure. We'll figure it out, but first, maybe we can finally have that talk, without interruptions. I laughed, the tension easing like a knot untying in my chest. I'd like that. As we walked out of the hospital into the early morning light, the city waking up around us, I knew things wouldn't be easy. The whispers would follow us. The risks still lingered. But with Noah by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. It's funny looking back, how close we came to losing everything. But in the end, we found something worth fighting for. Something worth the risk. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my confession. If you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. And tell me, honestly, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you risk it all for a chance at something real?